hard definitions around that, because the intention is you want to have a discrete set of table occurrences in one pod. I think FileMaker's kind of built somewhere in the dependency tree on some kind of ERD kind of concept, right? Just like the way we build on top of the program. So this is kind of appropriate. The big important thing, it was the hardest thing to get through my head when 7 came out, is that each layout is tied to one table occurrence, not a table. One table has many table occurrences, and each table occurrence has one table occurrence group, and there may be many layouts tied to one table occurrence. What's the laugh?
You just went to the next slide.
Yeah, I know. I'm praising this. Did I cheat going to the next slide? I gotta get used to it. Okay, down.
I like that one. That's good.
Yeah.
Very organized.
This was submitted by one of those 60 people on the list. I'm not allowed to tell you who. The real world scenario, the system works well because the guy knows it, but if I wanted to find context between two tables, context is important. I'm dulling it down on purpose. Where am I starting from? The whole idea of context in the table, in the relational graph is, where am I? Or when I'm working on a layout, where am I? What can I see from where I'm at? Where am I going? And can I get there from here? What's the path? And when it gets as squirrely as that kind of thing, how many people have started out with charts? At one point you had something like this. Anybody? Nobody's going to raise their hand.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So if I'm in that table down here and I want to get up here, I have to find a path. Well, thankfully there's a straight path in this case, but that may not always be the case. It could get very difficult. So what determines context? Well, when you're in the man, I'm playing with this tool there. When you're in the defined schema or defined database element, and you're looking at the relational graph, whatever tab you're on is when you're in the fields tab. Okay, so when you're in that working on a particular table, whatever table you're on, that's defining what fields you're going to be able to see. And the current table you're working on in schema is going to be the base table for table occurrences that you built. When you're working in layout mode, whatever base table or table occurrence that layout is built on, that's your context. The most important context you're working with when you're building a system in layout mode is, what's it based on? What table occurrence did I assign to that layout? And again, build the point. Each layout, they're always based on table occurrences, never on a table, never on a table occurrence group. Layouts are always based on TOs. Another place that you find context in the relational graph is when you're evaluating any kind of calculation with that evaluate this calculation dialog. So here's a picture of an example of the specified calculation, right? We've got the fields that we can pick from the context we're in. It'll default to the context you're in currently on whatever layout. If you're in layout mode, you've got your operators and you've got your functions by name. There's your context right there, your root context you're starting from. And in schema, that will be the table you're working on. And then you can relate to this device. You can relate to fields in other tables through relationships here, or work locally. But that's your context when you're in schema in the specified calculation dialog. A couple more and we're going to take a break. When you're doing a lookup and you're in schema, you're trying to assign a lookup to a field, you get this dialog box. And there's your context there. You're starting with that table. Okay, I'll leave that for a second. So here's the context. I'm going to start here, but I'm going to pull stuff from where? From what related table? And here I happen to be in the context table, and per what I was diagramming here in data modeling, I have a path to either the company or the phone. It might be a valid path that's useful. It might be an erroneous path, but it's showing me right now related paths. So those two paths there are valid. That's why they're not grayed out, but they may be erroneous if I haven't done my homework right in my data modeling and my relational graph. Third place you determine context in dialog boxes is starting from when you're doing a value list. Value lists work a little bit different than the other calculation dialog type elements. The context is in the bottom, not the top. I struggled for a long time. Why don't we FileMaker put it at the bottom? It should be in the top like everything else. But there's a reason for this. When you go to do a value list, most of the time, the related information you want to get in a value list is going to be local. It's building that relationship that's later. We're either going to have custom value lists or generally local values. So it becomes a step forward to go relationally. That's why it's going to default to the context you're in. But that is not the context from which you're starting. It's always in the bottom in the value lists. Okay? You're going to start here, pull this information. And if you don't select related, it'll just pull everything from the table, and it's just as if you did a table-based value list, not a related one. So I think what we're going to do, we're going to get into bidirectional relationships. But I want to let Stephen come up and talk. And this is a bit of a segue. I wanted to give you a little bit about context, a little about reason behind anchor buoy, and then we get into the nature of the bidirectional relationships and how we don't use them in anchor buoy and you do use them in other techniques. We'll pick up with that a little bit later. Questions? Comments? Kind of good to break this up. This is like 90, this is 100 slides, I think. It's pretty long. Yeah. It's trimmed down from 128. Okay. So, brief break. Stephen, you going to bring your computer up here?
Sure.
Okay.
I've already got a couple